once, and he would hide his weakness with his kindness. I had these kids in my youth group. This was years ago, and they were troublemaker kind of kids, right? It was an older brother and a younger sister, and the younger sister was all just sorts of bratty, and the older brother was just, he was a tough kid, right? And you just knew that, like, he's doing youth group now, but then he's going to jail, right? You just kind of, it's like everybody's got a place in the kingdom, and he can do prison ministry from the inside, right? Like, you just kind of, this was his trajectory. It's kind of his attitude towards life. And so, I'm working with these kids, and I would just watch them, and some tragic things happen in their life, and their grandfather is raising them, and I would watch their grandfather try to be kind. And in his kindness, what he thought was kindness, he would get walked all over. That these kids wouldn't receive the kindness as they should, and they would abuse it, they'd take advantage. And so I watched this man who you would love him. He was a great guy, and he was just pouring out his heart for these kids, but he didn't do it in a way that made sense. His kind was made him kind of weak. And I just remember thinking, like, this can't be it. This can't be the way that we're supposed to be kind to people, where it leaves such a big gap for them to hurt themselves and for them to hurt us. That doesn't make sense to me. How can we be kind without being kind of weak? What does that look like to unfold? In this series, we've been learning about God's vision for his church, for his life, for our lives in his church, for what it means to see that spread across the world. And this book, 1 Timothy, that we're walking through, kind of has this big vision for what it means to be God's people. And the vision for us is that we would be godly, healthy, growing people, leading a godly, healthy, growing church. That's the vision. If you read 1 Timothy, you say, what's kind of the point here? Where's he taking us? And that really is it. And as we do that, things begin to make more sense. God says, this is my house, this is my household, and in my house you follow my rules. Okay? In my house you follow my rules. Who used that this week? Anybody? Yeah? Amen. All right, sister. In my house you follow my rules. And this is God's house. He's saying, these are my rules. And I don't think it makes sense that in God's house he would design it so that kindness, the way we show kindness, would make us weak. I don't think that makes sense. I don't think that fits with the picture of God that we see in the Bible. And so specifically this morning, as we push through this section in chapter 5, verses 1 through 16, we're going to see that God doesn't want his church to be weak. There's a certain kind of kindness that doesn't make us kind of weak. There's a right way to do this. Now, 1 Timothy actually is kind of like this manager's manual. We've used that language before, that if you want to know why things work the way they do and what we should be doing to get the best results out of them, you go to the manager's manual, and here you open it up, and it's a bunch of instructions. This is how God's house should work. This is what kindness for us looks like. Okay, so that's what we're going to be heading into. I want to start with just the first two verses together. Verse 1 and verse 2 of chapter 5. It says this, do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Now, he starts with these sort of imperatives. This is how you have to do this. This is what you should do. But what's interesting is in order to get there, in order to get to that application point, there's this big foundational piece. And it has to do with how you see people. How do you see people? You have learned to see people in certain ways. Usually through hard lessons and maybe some not so great lessons. You've brought yourself some information and said, well, okay, if I look out for this, maybe that gives me leverage over them. If I can see this about a person, then maybe I can get what I want out of them. See, we learn to see people in certain ways. Depending on your social background, you might see people in certain rules. There's certain social rules surrounding how I view you and them and the other. There's certain ways that you view people about what they can give you or what danger you need to protect yourself against in them. So we have all these metrics, and when you meet somebody or know someone or get to know them more, you might start viewing them financially. You might start seeing them as, oh, there are things that you have that will satisfy wants that I have. You approach people and you think of them as their worst mistakes, or you may view them in their most dangerous potential. These are wrong ways to view people. And we learn them through being hurt. We learn them through conditioning and all sorts of things. But most of the ways that we naturally come about how to view people are not right. We need to be changing that. It shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. We need to heal the way we see people. And when I talk about healing, I'm not talking about you saw a really fun quote on Instagram and it just changed your life. That's not how that works, right? You didn't just have one article you read and it just changed everything for you. Normally, healing doesn't go that path. 99.999% of it all the time, healing is a slow process by which things get rewired, rerouted, renewed. It's not just, I'm going to take a me day and everything's going to be better. I'm just going to cut out the toxic people and my life is perfect. That's not what happens. You need to be healed. This is what happens, all right? The gospel changes how you see people. The gospel changes how you see people. It's going to heal the way you see if you understand how to apply it. Now, Timothy, the letter's written to Timothy, that's why it's called 1 Timothy. It's a letter that was written to him, and it explains to him this foundational thing about human relationships. That Paul, who's an apostle, he's in charge really here. He's writing to Timothy, and he says, you need to treat all generations with dignity and purity. And let's be honest, that's not how we approach relationships naturally. That's not how we approach them naturally. But foundational to the Christian view of humanity is that we don't determine someone's value or their worth based on what they do. Just think about that for a minute. We don't determine someone's value or their worth or the dignity they deserve based on what they do. Because, listen, the gospel is the message that Jesus Christ died on the cross to rescue you. And there's nothing you could do to add value to that. There's nothing you could do to make it worth his time. Right? This is how God came into your life. He interrupted you and said, you're way worse than you think you are. That's how the relationship starts. And he says, I can rescue you, but that's not where you get your value from. And then we would take that message and we'd say, that is such good news for me. And then we would look at other people and say, you know what you need to do? You need to earn it. You need to earn my respect. You need to earn the dignity I'm going to give you. You need to earn your value. But that's never been what's happened. Our value, as God looks at us, is not because of what we've done. It's because what he's done for us. That's how we need to view people. That's how we need to view people. God sees value in who we are, not because of what we've done, but because of who made us. You ever go to a museum? Right? And there's like the section, there's like classics, and there's like Renaissance art and these types of things. And then you go to like the abstract section, and you're like, people are paying for this? Like people pay, like that's just a triangle. Like, it's like a good triangle, but it's just a triangle, you know? And then you start looking at some of the names. And even as like non-art people, like we might recognize some of these like big names. You're like, wow. And they're like, yeah, this is worth $250 billion. And you're like, wow, it's a good triangle. But it's not based on what it is, not really. It's based on who made it. Because I could take my own triangle and they wouldn't pay anything for it. I think it's a better triangle. But it's about who made it. That's where the value is coming from. And yet we would look at people and you would say, you need to earn your value. That's never been how God's looked at you. That's not what the gospel teaches us. And especially in God's house, there's no way that we operate with this rule that the world uses, where it's like power, right, or sex or money. Those are sort of the things that determine value or influence or worth. There's no way that can be brought into God's house in a way that fits. He says, not in my house. That's not how we treat people here. That's not the rules that we use. And maybe you have a long life of looking at people the wrong way, of seeing them the wrong way. Let me explain to you where that comes from. The reason we do that, we view people wrongly, is because we operate out of a self-serving, self-focused survival. Self-serving, self-focused survival. We take those things, we say, I need to survive, and my survival depends on me. And so really, if you're a casualty in that, great. Maybe you're fun to have along the way, that's great too. But what can I take from you or leverage out of our relationship or pull from you that's going to be better for me? This isn't working out for me. I just think it's better for me. That's the kind of language we use in relationships. Today, we're being called to grow out of that. And you know what that's like because you've been on the other side where people in their self-focus, in their self-preservation, in their survival, they have hurt you. You ever been in that moment where you realize like, oh my goodness, that person I trusted, and yet they took advantage of me because they were so concerned about themselves. And you learned from that, right? But sometimes what we do is we take that and we go, okay, so I need to be more like that. I need to make sure that doesn't happen to me again. That's the wrong approach. You're just becoming more like the enemy. Today we're being called to grow out of that. The gospel transformation in our heart means that we need to serve, not look to be served. Right? It used to be a self-serve kind of life. But the gospel transformation comes in and says, do you know Jesus served you in an unthinkable way? So it changes all this. And the gospel transformation comes in and it changes your heart because you used to have this self-focus on your life. And yet, now in Christ, you're taught this secret to joy, this secret to fulfillment, this secret to rest. And you go, that's actually not found if I just focus deeper on me. It's actually found in Christ. And you don't need to survive anymore because Jesus, through his work, has bought you life. And so what happens is you're given these things and Jesus says, here, can you trust me for this? And so walking in faith would be to say, I don't need a self-focused, self-preserving survival anymore. I don't need that. I can trust Jesus to provide for me. I can trust Jesus to walk before me. I can trust in what he said to me. And so I can rest in these things, and it changes how I see people. I don't have to step on you to go forward anymore. This sort of like intake, like black hole gravity of like life's all about me and focused on me, it stops that. It reverses it, and now it's like because of who Jesus is, because of what God's done in my heart, I now give. It doesn't have to be about me. Like Jesus has done enough for me, I don't need you to do anything for me. It's this freedom, it's this new way to see people. And it actually unfolds. What I'm talking about is the truth that when you understand what you can trust Jesus with, it changes all your relationships. It changes all your relationships. Right? You look at others impurely because you have not learned how to find like an satisfaction in intimacy with God. That's true. You can take that to the bank. You take and you hoard because you have not learned how to trust God's provision for you. Right? You fear and you doubt. You try to control others because you haven't learned to rest in the fact that God is both good and fully in control. You see, our view of God trickles down into how we live, which then defines our relationships. And what we're seeing here is a view of people that's shaped by the correct view of God. That's what Paul's laying out. That's what these instructions come from. If you're a Christian, then the moment you were forgiven, that relationship with God was healed. When we talk about, if you're in Christian circles especially, or you read, you'll hear the word saved. You say, oh, I was saved at age whatever, or yeah, Jesus saved me, or Jesus can save you. That word save in the New Testament, is The same word for healed. You've been healed. You've been brought into life. And when you think about the death of Jesus being applied to your guilt, it heals this relationship you have with God, and that you're forgiven. And you can walk in this forgiveness. And then that means I'm not an enemy of God anymore. Now I'm a child of God. I'm not an enemy of God anymore. I'm accepted by God. And now that I'm accepted by God, that's the primary thing about me. That's the satisfying core of who I am. And I don't need to look at you to make me feel better about myself. I don't need you to be my Savior. I already have one. I don't need you to worship me because I'm busy worshiping Him. And it redefines all these expectations that we've placed on other people. Now, that's the proactive side. What about the reactive side? Because guess what? In life, tragedy happens. And I have all sorts of other identities, don't I? I am a child of God, but I'm also a dad. I'm also a husband. I'm a friend. I'm a brother. I'm a pastor. I have these other identities, but if my identity in Christ is my center, then that's the fulfillment. That's the peace. That's the joy. That's the rest. And even in tragedy, in hardship, in darkness, even when some of those things are taken or threatened, my person wasn't relying on them. My center, my joy, my hope, it wasn't built on those identities. The gospel changes how we see people. And it changes that by healing us. When we start interacting with others, not out of a need of desperation, not out of this need for control, but when it's overflowing from this peace, health, then it starts to heal those relationships. It starts to heal those relationships. Okay, I'm going to give you, we'll do a little poll here, all right? A little survey time. Okay, I want you to raise your hand if you have any relationships at all that could use any healing. Let's so I'm going to give you two options, okay? So keep your hands up if you have any relationships at all that need healing, and then keep your hands down if you're just a liar. And then, okay? This is something we all have. Every single one of us. And part of it's our fault because there's a bunch of garbage on this side of the fence. Now, there's stuff on that side of the fence, and that's garbage, and that's their fault, and that's their problem. We can't deal with that. But what we can do is deal with garbage on our side of the fence. And those are my doubts, and those are my insecurities, and those are my fears. Those are my problems. Those are my lack of faith. And I'm bringing those things into this relationship, and I'm disrupting this relationship. And so the healing that needs to take place between me and you starts with me and God. That's how we see relationships healed. The gospel changes how we see people. Now, practically speaking, there's all sorts of situations in life, right? And they're sticky. And there's complications. There's complexities. And there's exceptions. Well, you know, yeah, that's easy to say, but you don't know the people I got to deal with, and they're... But it's always been that way. Broken people, messy people trying to love and grow while they're hurting other and helping other broken, messy people. Like, it's just a mess. That's what we're just one big mess here. That's who we are. But what happens today is not different than what happened in the first century. Not really. People are people. And in the first century, there was this situation. And so how do we show this kindness to people? When I see you correctly, and I'm going to show you kindness, but I don't want the kind of kindness that makes me kind of weak. I don't want that. That doesn't make sense. How do I show you kindness when you're godly? How do I show you kindness when you're ungodly? That's sort of the situation in this first century church, and it's particular in the context they're talking about widows, godly widows and ungodly widows, and we'll get to that. But really, what you have to read this as is like, it's not just widows. This is how we care for all people. So we're going to jump into that. What does it look like to care for people who are needy and godly? But how do you be kind to people who are trying to take advantage of you? What does that look like? So we're going to understand this whole passage together, and then I'll come back and kind of dice it up. So let's look at it starting in verse 3. He says this, 3 through 16. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead, even while she lives. Give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who has not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she's over 60, has been faithful to her husband, and is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. As for the younger widows, do not put them on such a list. For when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Thus they bring judgment on themselves because they have broken their first pledge. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle, going about from house to house, and not only do they become idlers, but also busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. So I counsel younger widows to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Some have, in fact, already turned away to follow Satan. If any woman who's a believer has widows in her care, she should continue to help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church can help those widows who are really in need. This passage tells Christians who we're supposed to be. It's a kind of kindness that isn't kind of weak. It's a kind of kindness that's actually empowered by the gospel to be incredibly strong. It's an empowered gospel tool for discipleship. So kindness doesn't make us weak. It actually makes us strong. And we're going to see that in this passage. Another way you can say that is the call for us this morning is to be defined by a just and generous kindness. To be defined by a just and generous kindness. This is a big situation in the church here in this passage. And some have this help. They need help. And some just need kind of a stern talking to. But both of them are asking for the same thing. And a just and generous kindness is going to allow the church to have the important conversations and to get the right people what they need. So on the front end, Paul is really clear here. He's like, there's a ministry of compassion that I expect to take place. Right? There are people in need, and especially the Christians in their lives should be caring for the needy people. Right? It's just a part of who we are, right? In verse 4, this is the generous part. Verse 4, he talks about, hey, there's actually kind of a design here where the parents care for the kids until they can't, and then the kids should care for the parents. And I know that's not always how it works in life, but he's saying there's a design here that's like pleasing to God, where one who is unable is cared for by one who is. And when those roles reverse, there's a gracious kindness that's evident. He says this is pleasing to God. When that happens, it's pleasing. But he also says in the end at verse 16 that he's like, if you're somebody and there's this person in your life, this widow who's like coming in and you know them and you love them, maybe they're not your parent or whatever, but if you have this chance to love this person, you should do that. Which is not like a crazy concept. But he's like, that makes sense. The ministry of the church is through the people, right? The church itself, like this, we'll take our church, for example. We are not a social service. That's not what the church is. What the church's primary role and primary design is like, hey, the church is going to equip the people, and the people go out, and we change people's lives with what we do. That's really the design of it, that we get equipped here to go out and do the work there in our own lives. And he says that's kind of this thing where like it's especially true in your own immediate relationships. Especially. So in verse 7 and 8, he doesn't mince words about it. He says, give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. He's like, nobody gets to claim they didn't hear this, and nobody gets to come back and say, oh, well, I wish somebody would have told me. He's saying, I'm being really clear about this. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, a little bit of context in that is like people would try to use sort of the Christian faith to say, like, well, I'm going to let you guys take care of that because I'm a Christian now. Like, I'm a Christian, so maybe you could, instead of me being responsible to you, maybe you just go ask the church, or maybe you just ask some other people. And there's some social things that they were trying to get away with there, but this is not super uncommon in our world. The people closest to us should be the ones who can define the most, like, yeah, I see their heart for Jesus. Listen to that. The people closest to us should have the clearest testimony of our love for Jesus. The problem is, those are also the ones who have seen us the most tired and the most stressed and the most wore out. But follow me on this. That means they should also see us at our most humble, at our most repentant, at our most ready to receive grace. That should be the situation we have in our closest relationships. Take the ministry in front of you seriously. And take it personally. Right? Take it really personally. Like God is opening a moment for you to love people well. And oftentimes when there's a need in front of us, we don't think about it like opportunity. Different words come to mind like inconvenience. Like I was busy already. Because there's a distraction to the other things I was working on. Yet it says here, no. God wants you to be the minister to these people. To unfold your love for them now. So take it personally, take it seriously. And it's now. Like that's the thing that I find so interesting about this. Like if somebody has the opportunity, just do it. Just be these people. And a lot of times we like to kick the ball down the field. And we're like, well, when the kids are a little older, when in the next season, next season I'm going to be a lot less busy. And we just lie to ourselves. Pretty soon, but if you're not being generous with your kindness now, you won't be in a year. Right? If you're not deciding to do it, you're never going to do it. He says, decide to be people who have a generous kindness. Take the ministry in front of you seriously and personally. Be defined by a just and generous kindness. He says, okay, so this generous kindness we have, it needs to fall on these godly, needy widows. Like they need it, and these are believers who have a history of serving in the church, praying for the church, worshiping with the church, being hospitable. Like they need help, and Paul's like, absolutely, 100%. The church family comes around, and we lift up the people who need it. Absolutely. Because this generous kindness, what I'm doing is I'm helping someone continue on in their godliness, right? He says, but there's a different kind. There's a just kindness as well, where you are not just going to allow ungodly people. I'm not going to help ungodly people continue in ungodliness. That part doesn't make sense. I'm not going to allow people to just take advantage. And that justice starts to unfold when you're like, hey, I love you so much, I'm not going to give you what you're asking for. I care about you so much, I know you think that that's going to help you, but really what you're looking for is comfort, and you don't really need comfort in this. What you need is to get a move on here. You need to kind of change the approach. So in this specific scenario, in the first century, they had this problem with these ungodly widows. So something tragic would happen, right? And would lead this young woman who now she doesn't have a husband. Possibly she has kids, right? So this is like a rough situation. And in that situation, there's a discovery. It was like, well, yeah, we obviously want to help you eat. We want to get you back on your feet. We want to help you. But they discover along the way that this young woman is not actually a godly young woman. That this widow now has more opportunity for sin. Because now she has all this time, right? And so he says, okay, now we've given you your meals and we've kind of plugged you in. You get to go around and now you're just kind of gossiping. And really the language here is talking about like there's a sexual immorality that starts to come up because kind of out of boredom and just sitting around. He says, this isn't a good scenario. He says, we don't want to do this. There are people who are godly and needy, and we want to help them in their godliness. And he says, there's these ungodly people. He says, it is not kind to just help them in their ungodliness. He says, that's not what I want you to do. So a few verses back, or a couple chapters ago, we talked about Paul using this language of childbearing as kind of a big language for what it means to be walking as a woman in God's design, right? He's kind of encapsulating all that in that word of childbearing. And he kind of does the same thing here, where he's saying there's these women, and they go through something absolutely tragic, but then they're going to use that as an excuse to just stop living. He says, I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to be this excuse where now they just leech the resources from the church and they don't move on into the future. He says, God has more for you. I'm not saying things weren't tragic. I'm not saying things weren't hard. I'm just saying that the past mistakes or the past hardness, the past sin, the past brokenness, that doesn't have to define your entire future. He's saying there's more. And so Paul says, I don't want them to just give up and stay there and then just kind of roll around in sin and be a cost to the church. He says, I want them to go on. I want them to have a future. This is true for all of us. Whenever we go through tragedy, there's a moment in our brain, and some of us, it's a very long moment, where we say, maybe this is just it, and I just don't go any further. It's just not true. That we're called forward. The Christian has these parameters for how we show kindness to people. And the parameters are discipleship. It should spur people on it. So it empowers us to have these hard conversations where we're able to say, look, I love you enough to not give you what you're asking for. I love you enough to not be as primary focused on your comfort as I am about what's good for you. I love you enough to push you to do the hard things that need to get done. I love you enough that I'm going to maybe push you out of the nest. Right? I'm going to take the binky away. It's time to go. We got to get moving here. That's a kindness. That's a just kindness. It's not that our kindness is run by sentimentality. It can't be run on, well, who has the hardest story or who gets the trophy for the worst thing. Like, it can't be that. This is a kindness that pushes us more towards Christ. It's a sanctifying kindness. That's what we're called to have with people. That when someone comes in our life, you say, how can I help you? How can I be kind to you in a way that helps you look more like Jesus? Because it's tempting to enable. It's tempting to have the soft answers. But we have a kindness that calls people up and out of their sin. Up and out of their sin. And that's a bit of a conundrum. If you've ever been on the just kindness side of a conversation and you're explaining to someone who's asking for enablement that I'm not going to do that, you can see it in their eyes. They don't understand. Many people have a really hard time understanding that the tough love concept, the concept of good news might hurt a little. Good things might be hard. And it's hard. That's a hard conversation. That's a hard thing to walk through in a relationship. But it's one of the beauties of Jesus. Because even those things that you're like, these two don't make sense together, that's the story of Jesus. It's the story of perfection coming into brokenness. It's a story of forgiveness meeting guilt. It's a story of life overshadowing, taking over death. Right? And Jesus coming into our life did the same thing. Jesus drew us to him in his kindness, but his kindness never pretended we were perfect. Never. His kindness never pretended that we didn't need to change. His kindness calls us out and it calls sin what it is. It says, I love you enough to tell you that this won't work. This has to stop. I have more for you. I have better for you. That's kindness. A kindness that ignores wounds is not a kindness. A kindness that doesn't tell the truth is not a kindness. It's not compassionate to someone to ignore what they need most, to enable them. If you love someone, you tell them what they need. Now, Jesus calls us to love others like that. That's how he loved us, right? And he calls us to then love others like that. We have a just and generous kindness, and that's our method of discipleship. That's our method of relationship. I'll just be honest with you, like there are a lot of people that I've walked through in discipleship relationships, and we get to the point where they run out of excuses. Right? We get to the point where they say, hey, look, you were raised that way. Yeah, this was hard. You went through that. You had that happen. It's a lot of work. Life's busy. There's no money. And eventually you get through the end, and it always comes back to that. I get that, but what are we going to do now? I get that, but how are you going to grow? I get that, but are you willing to put in the work? And eventually, once they get through all the excuses, and they get to the point where it's like, listen, Jesus is calling you to be more. Jesus is walking with you. Jesus will empower you, but you have to stop doing that and walk with him. And people leave. I can't tell you how many people give up. and walk away. Because they don't want the just kindness. They just want generosity to kind of flow. They want pats on the back. They want to feel better about themselves. And I get it because I do that. We all live there. And we need people around us to be like, hey, stop whining. Like, hey, I get it. I know it's hard. Let's keep going together. Let's keep moving. You're not alone in this. Let's keep moving. But people want to stay. People want to stay. But that's not love. That's not how, we can't do that. We can't let people do that. Because of what Jesus says. In John 13, he says, a new command I give to you, love one another. And then he defines it. He defines what that is. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. That's the way. That's the definition of how we love another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. In your relationships, in your circumstances, you should be defined by a just and generous kindness. That should be the guiding truth. And so I have just questions that you need to answer about who has God put in your life? Who has God put in your life that you've been stingy with because you've held back the generous? Who has God put in your life that you've enabled, but you've been calling it kindness and it really isn't? Who has God put in your life that God says, this is the ministry I have for you? And you need to take it personally and seriously, and you need to invest in it, and you need to do the work? Who has God put in front of you and says, hey, this relationship you have with this person needs healing. It needs the gospel to correct. It needs the ability of Jesus to fix things inserted in the middle of that relationship. What does it look like to see the gospel transform that part of your life? That's what we're taking away from this. That's what it means to say, no, I want to be just and generous with my kindness. It needs to be this powerful thing, not a weak thing. I don't get stepped on, but I want to live this way. I want to commit to living this way.